a Rabbinic Anthology selected with an introduction by C.G. Montefiore and H.Loewe. Introduction by C.G. Montefiore. It would be impertinent and of no interest to anybody to explain how it has come about and why that I, no rabbinic scholar and very imperfectly acquainted with Aramaic, Biblical Hebrew, called itself ARMYA in transliteration, have yet given much time to and written many pages about rabbinic, religious, and ethical teaching. I was started on the road by that remarkable rabbinic scholar, Solomon Schechter. After him, I had the good fortune to be guided and helped by my dear friend Israel Abrahams, and lastly, I have been lucky enough to obtain the assistance and supervision of a third scholar of great distinction, Mr. Herbert Lowe, in collaboration with whom the present work has been prepared. Thus aided and supported, I have, I hope, made comparatively few blunders, though I have ventured to go my own way in selection, interpretation, and comment. In this book, as in a former one, Rabbinic Literature and Gospel Teaching, 1930, but this time more fully, Mr. Lowe will put forward his own views and indicate where they differ from mine. The present volume will be the last of my attempts to put the main facts about the religious conceptions of the old rabbis in as simple a form as possible before the public. The idea struck me and took my fancy that there was room and even need for one more anthology from rabbinic literature. The existing anthologies, so far as I knew them, in French, German, and English, were to my mind unsatisfactory and inadequate. Some of them consisted for the most part of brief sayings, adages, and reflections, excellent and blameless in themselves, but somehow insufficiently revealing the true nature of rabbinic teaching and religion. Even when these anthologies contain stories and legends, they too often omit those that are really characteristic. I do not mean by this structure that what is given in these anthologies is only what is good, and that the bad and the crude are left out. For every anthology is to be a collection of flowers and not of weeds, and my own will be no exception to that universal rule. But the crude and the bad, though absent from the selected quotations, must not be entirely ignored. Where the good is considerably above the average, where it is exceptional, or again, where it is habitual and predominant, this must be indicated. And the good need not always be the very respectable. One does not want merely tidbits and elegant extracts. Ancient and modern tastes differ, and some things which the tradition, which places particular sayings in the mouths of particular rabbis, is to be trusted. On the other hand, a considerable portion of the quotations is anonymous. The dates of many rabbis whose names are given can roughly be ascertained. The earliest of them belong to the 1st century, the latest to the 5th century of the Common Era. Some of the rabbis lived before the Common Era. Occasionally, a few pre-Christian citations will occur. In any case, many sayings are not the original utterances of the rabbis who relate them. They are traditional and much older than the date of the authority who records them. For these quotations, see Exercis 3 and Excursus 4, H.L. The anonymous passages may be spread over an equal or even a longer range of time. Thus we get a period of at least some 4 or 5 centuries for this anthology. It may be asked whether, in view of this long space of years, one has any right to speak generically of the rabbis or of the rabbinic religion. How absurd it would be if, in completing a religious anthology from English literature between the years 1500 and 1900, one spoke generically of the religion of English theologians or of English clergymen, as if during these 400 years they had a common religion or the same religious ideas. While there never was one Judaism, even if you posit Judaism about 540 BCE, but in point of fact, there was far less change and variety as regards the rabbis between, say, 100 and 500 of the Common Era than in England between 1500 and 1900. There was doubtless some development. There were doubtless varieties of view between this rabbi and that. The rabbis of 500, taken roughly as a group, did perhaps in some things hold religious views which differed from the views of the rabbis of 100. Well, the Babylonian and the Jerusalem Talmud are further apart than the differences of years. Historical circumstances, local events, special persecutions, influences of environment cause particular rabbis to express particular views. Thus, to take a couple of examples, the circumstances of his age and environment might make one rabbi express opinions favorable to proselytes and another rabbi views unfavorable or hostile, or they might make one rabbi more bitter against the nation. Well, actually, it's not just people outside ethnicity. If you look at its root, it's, the Goyim are the people who turn their back on God, the polytheists and secularists, and another less so. Nevertheless, in spite of such and other differences, due to these and other causes, due to the fact that one rabbi might by nature be more liberal or progressive, are possessed of a greater mind than another, and quite a large number of fundamental ideas, there was a marked agreement extending over all these centuries. It is possible that historians might tell us that there was, roughly speaking, a similar agreement among Christian priests and theologians of the years 600 to 1000, or 500 to 900, or 700 to 1100 of the Common Era in Western or in Eastern Europe. However this may be, I think I am justified in speaking of the rabbinic religion or of rabbinic religious ideas, are justified even in speaking of the ancient rabbis as if there were a large common measure of agreement between them all. A rabbinic anthology must be something more than a golden treasury. It must include all that would be naturally included in a golden treasury, but it must contain yet more. The subjectivity of the anthologist must come in, not so much by the inclusion of what he thinks the finest and noblest things in the rabbinic literature, or perhaps, let me more modestly say, in the main and leading examples or books of that literature, as by the inclusion of what he regards as the most characteristic things, he must also say frankly, this quotation is fine or interesting, but hardly characteristic. This next quotation is both fine and characteristic. If a Jew of the year, say 1000 of the Common Era, had made a collection of what he regarded as the finest and noblest things in rabbinic literature, it would have been a very different collection from that which I should make if I were rigidly to include only those things which I thought finest and noblest. My contention is that my anthology, strictly so limited, would present a distorted view of the old rabbis and of their religious opinions. For my own religious ideas and ideals, my own religious beliefs and aspirations differ widely from theirs. On the other hand, the qualities and limitations of an anthology need not be abandoned. It is not necessary, and there is no intention to present a complete description of rabbinic religion, illustrated by a series of extracts. That would be too long and too difficult. One need not carefully illustrate the weak points of rabbinic religion, culling weeds as well as flowers. One need not be systematic or complete. One may justly omit a good deal which happens to be uninteresting to oneself, but I am, I think, bound at least to indicate the difference between the religious teaching of the rabbis and that of modern, and especially of liberal Judaism. People are going to let go of religious and family values. We don't need to think of that as a separate category because they can pick and choose what they want. So let's talk about whatever, right? To be fair to the old rabbis, I must, I think, indicate the doctrines are the practices which they held most dear, about which they felt most deeply, which they loved most intensely, for which they were ready to die, or about which they would make no compromises or concessions. For if there are doctrines and practices central to their religion which have disappeared from my religion, these, even an anthology, must here and there be alluded to. I must occasionally reveal their dislikes and what I choose to consider their limitations and their narrownesses, for these may sometimes give an added luster to the flowers, making them, when they transcend the narrowness and the intolerances, the more beautiful and fragrant. The shadows show off the light.